Welcome to Reddit Quests. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more videos. Reddit. When was your gut feeling actually right? Story 1. Growing up, I was always wary of my uncle on my dad's side of the family, not blood-related. Even as a young child, I just knew that I didn't like being around him. He never gave me any reason to feel this way, and I never voiced it to anyone. As I grew older, my family moved away and I saw less of him, but anytime my extended family met for holidays, I would see him and avoid him. Couple years down the track, I was around 12 or 13 when my parents sat me and my older brother down and told us that my cousin, my uncle's daughter, had been raped and abused by him from a young age. This had all come to light when my aunt caught it happening, later found out she was abused by him too. Really wish my gut feeling hadn't been right about that one. Story 2. When I was pregnant for the first time, something just felt off. I knew from the very beginning it wasn't going to end well. A few weeks later I started cramping and spotting, which can be normal in early pregnancy. I ended up going to the ER. They couldn't find any evidence of a pregnancy in my uterus and decided it was a miscarriage and wanted to send me home. But that gut feeling that something was very wrong was still there, and I listened to it. I demanded that I be seen by my OB, who was head of obstetrics at that hospital, and wouldn't leave until he saw me. He had me in emergency surgery 4 hours after he came to examine me to remove my ruptured fallopian tube and stop the internal bleeding. Had I not listened to my gut, I'd be dead. Story 3. It was 1995, I was 18, still living with my parents, and I was walking home from a friend's house at about 2 a.m. in the middle of the summer. He only lived 5 or 6 blocks away, and we often hung out watching movies after I got off work. Usually I would drive to his house because we'd been out with other friends, but this night I had parked at home, and we walked to his place. There's not usually a lot of traffic between our houses, but this night I was about halfway home when a pickup truck drives by with 2 guys in the cab and 2 in the bed. I immediately felt like I was in danger. I saw the truck turn the corner and I dove over some hedges in the closest yard I could find. I hid under them. I saw the truck come back around the corner and slowly drive down the street. When it got to where I was hiding, I heard one of the guys say, "Where did he go?" and another respond that he didn't know. They kept driving and I didn't see them again. I stayed hidden for a good 15 minutes before getting up and running the rest of the way home. I'm certain they would have jumped me if they found me. Story 4. One of my mates had an experience while living in London. He worked in hospitality, which often meant he didn't get home until very late in a suburb called Seven Sisters, which wasn't the safest. He gets off the tube, starts walking back to his place at about 2 a.m. and notices there are 3 very large men following him. He said he couldn't explain it, but he started getting a weird feeling, so he tested it out by slowing down and speeding up his walking pace. They would match it every single time. He hadn't been living in this place very long, and had 3 keys, one for the front door, one for the back door, and one for his room. Being a new place, he didn't have a feeling for which key was which quite yet, so when he got to his front door, the first key he tried didn't work. He looks back and notices the guys have opened the little gate to his small front yard garden and are on his property walking towards him. He tries the second key, it unlocks the front door, he closes it, locks it again, and kind of just collapses to his knees to look through the mail slot and sees the 3 guys just standing there talking amongst themselves for about 3 minutes before they take off. My mate asks himself what the EF they would have done to him if it had been the 3rd key that unlocks his front door. Story 5. Had this random friend I just met, kind of a weird dude, no real family, so once he met my group of friends he just kind of followed us everywhere. He was one of those people who just had a bullseye for bullies on him. I was living in the hood in LA, we're walking over an overpass and a car full of cholos slowly passes us, eyes on us. As soon as the car passes, my friend was like, "Let's hide under this bridge." We book it, hide in the dark under the bridge, and just a few seconds later the car full of cholos slowly drives down where they assumed we were going to be walking. We can see them looking everywhere, cruising slowly, wondering where we were. As soon as they left the street, we booked it back to my house, staying in the shadows until we were safe. Story 6. Back when I was about 10 or 11, I asked my mother if we could take my grandmother out to lunch. She was kind of against it, but I kept insisting that I really wanted to see my grandmother and that she would want to go to lunch that day. While we were out at the mall after getting lunch with my grandmother, she started slurring her speech and became extremely confused. She was having a stroke. Luckily, my mom noticed what was going on and got her to the hospital within 20 or 30 minutes. Doctors said they were able to stop the stroke and she came out of it basically the same as she was before. Couple days after the fact, my mom told me I had basically saved my grandmother's life by making sure we went out to lunch with her that day. Story 7. I stopped at Home Depot to pick up an item, so I knew it was going to be a quick trip. I'm in the store and notice I'm pretty much the only girl in there besides employees. I couldn't find what I was looking for and had to ask multiple employees before I found it. I check out, and as I'm heading out to my car, I notice a shady dude standing against a tree on one side of my car. On the other side of my car is another shady guy sticking his arm outside of his car window. When I walked out, they both turned and stared at me. My heart dropped, I started to feel queasy, and my mind instantly knew to turn around and go inside. I stood there shaking at the front of the store until I could get the courage to ask an employee to walk me to my car. As soon as they saw me walking out with an employee, the guy standing by the tree walked around my car and into the driver's side of the car, parked next to me. To this day, I swear, I was a short walk away from being kidnapped. Story 8, driving in Pittsburgh. I stop at a red light. Hill goes up on my left, downhill on my right. Poor visibility to the left. The light turns green, but my brain tells me, "Hey bud, wait a sec, I think this is a little weird, but I don't go yet." A millisecond later, a massive navy blue F-350 comes barreling downhill through the intersection from my left, blowing past the red light at about 45, then trundles down the hill. If I'd have gone, I would have been destroyed by 3 tons of Ford truck for sure. Instead, I trusted the spider sense. Bonus story, I was going down a hill on some 2-lane highway, when at the bottom of the hill, I noticed there was a bus stop for some reason. The bus wasn't pulled over to the side to pick people up, so he was blocking the entire right lane. I have to hit the brakes partly due to speed, and mostly because I can't go around him because traffic is flying by on the left. As I'm waiting 10 feet behind him for a break in the cars in the left to go, something in the back of my mind says, I bet someone else doesn't see that bus. So I look in my rear view and sure enough, there's a white Toyota Tundra, another truck. Barreling toward me way too fast. No time for thinking, Jay just hit the go button and swing my car to the right to try to move onto the shoulder, reasoning being that it'll mitigate the impact a little. I was right. The lady hit me, bounced me around and sent my phone flying, but when we got out and inspected our vehicles, neither were damaged. She apologized. I just was thrown off by that bus. I reassured her it was fine. We bumped elbows and continued. Story 9. When I was a kid, I was doing my first ever deep clean of my bedroom, getting rid of old clothes and toys and such. While cleaning out my closet, I found an old picture cut out from the local newspaper of Lyndon Johnson visiting my parents' hometown. The picture was taken outside with some locals in the background. I was going to throw the picture away but suddenly got the strongest feeling not to do it, so I set it aside. Later I showed it to my mom and asked her about it. She freaked out and showed my grandma, who also freaked out. Turns out one of the locals in the background of the picture was my grandpa. He died when my mom was 12. That picture was one of only a handful we had of him. I had never seen a picture of him before this. I was so glad I didn't throw that clipping away. Story 10. There are a bunch of bars right next to my university here where I live. At the start and the end of the semester, everybody, thousands of students, start gathering around the street where most bars are located and just parties all night. On one of these occasions in 2019, it was the end of the semester. I had just got there a bit late because I was working on the lab at the uni, and the moment I got there, something just didn't feel right. The people there, how they were acting, how they were moving, how they were talking, something felt different in the air. We were crossing through the giant group of people since we were looking for my girlfriend at the time, and the people who we were expecting to meet there. I froze in place, and I can't really explain why to this day. But I just felt something really bad was about to happen, and my friend noticed how I was too attentive and kind of in panic. He snapped me out of it, and I told him that we needed to find everyone and leave that place. For my surprise, he just agreed. I think he noticed something was wrong with me and probably just went for it so I could calm down. My girlfriend and our friends didn't take long to find, and they were confused because I was acting so erratic, and I was kind of having a panic attack. But they eventually followed me out of the crowd, and right as we were out of the bar area, we started hearing a bunch of gunshots and people started screaming. Shortly after, the police was rushing into the area. What happened was that some gang members decided to use the party to settle some score, probably hoping the crowd would help them get out unnoticed. 5 people were ill and 3 injured that day. The police apparently caught them, but I'm not sure about that part. After that, those periodical parties at this street were never the same. Way less people, and now they don't even close the streets anymore because it's not that big of a crowd. Who would have thought? To this day, my friends like telling this story about how I saved their lives. And On rare occasions, someone asks me if I knew about the gang fight that was going to happen or something like that. I honestly don't know what triggered me that day, but me and the people with me are really glad it did. I think I might have caught view of a gun while crossing the crowd and didn't consciously notice it, but kicked some sense of danger on me. Story 11. I had been living and working in Korea, and one day I was coming up out of a subway station and saw a man talking to another foreign woman. She had that polite, frozen smile on her face, the "why is this guy talking to me" smile. I walked up to her, linked my arm with hers and said, "Hey Sarah, there you are? Are you ready to go?" And just started walking. The guy followed us, but I sped up and made an abrupt turn into a coffee shop. We hid and I saw him walk past, still looking for her. We ended up getting coffee and chatting for a bit, and I found out that he had followed her off the train and had been getting increasingly aggressive for the last 10 minutes. I don't know what might have happened, but I'm really glad I interfered. Story 12. Helped a victim of human trafficking get to a shelter. Context. I was a medical student at the time, now a resident, and the city my school was in is a hub for human trafficking. I noticed a patient in the ER who had a pretty bad injury to her face was with a sketchy-looking guy who was not related to her. She wasn't my patient, but I brought my gut feeling up to her doctor, who then made up some excuse to talk to the patient alone and got her to help. I never talked to her myself, but I couldn't shake the vibe I got from looking at her and the man she was with. Story 13. It started out as a gut feeling when I felt that something was off about my mom's boyfriend. Once I felt this way, I started to notice the red flags. The first one was the way my dog reacted to him. Even to this day, he's the only person my dog flat out didn't like. I think he might have even kicked him at one point when we weren't around. The next major red flag I noticed was that whenever his daughters came over, 6 and 8, they rarely wanted to spend time with their own father and would hang out with my mom. It almost felt like they were trying to avoid him. I ended up bringing my concerns to my mom and she started to notice things too and so broke it off with him. A few months later, she gets contacted by an investigator. Apparently the boyfriend had been caught trying to sleep with his current girlfriend's daughter, so they wanted to get a statement from mom. I'm just glad he got caught, and it sounds like he'll be in jail for quite some time. My mom's the only woman in the house, so I don't think the dude was trying to come after my brother or I. Plus, we're both bigger than the man too. Story 14. Not me but my wife. I had a work friend who used to come over to smoke blunts and play Xbox. I liked the guy even though I knew he was a bit odd. He was really good at Call of Duty and rolled a means blunt. He used to tell some tall tales that everyone knew were bullshit. Well, my wife, who was only my girlfriend back then, always got a creep vibe from him. She said he looked at her with so much anger and malice but never indicated any specific action that made her uncomfortable. After a while I stopped hanging out with the friend since he wasn't coming to town as much for work. Fast forward a few years, and another mutual friend calls me to say the Xbox friend was illed by police. Unfortunately, only after he had already illed his neighbor and his wife. Crazy. Story 15. When I was a young woman, my husband and I lived on a military base. At the time, the base was wide open, and many local people used it as a shortcut from one town to another. The base also had free base newspapers available at many places on base. One week, the newspaper said that facilities engineers, base maintenance, were going to begin installing attic fans in our townhouses. Sure enough, someone banged on my door later in the week and announced that he was there to install my attic fan. I was immediately suspicious. He was not military, dirty, scraggly beard, paint-stained clothes. But mostly it was my dog's reaction. Candy was a husky shepherd mix, so not a small dog. She'd put herself between me and him as best she could. Her hackles were up and she was growling. That deep bass in the chest growl that you feel more than hear. I asked to see a work order and ID. He said, "I don't need no effing work order," and yanked open the screen door. It was latched, but those kinds of latches are meant to keep toddlers and dogs in, not grown men out. Candy roared and went for his throat. He jumped back and slammed the screen. I grabbed Candy, dragged her back, slammed and locked the door, ran to the back and slammed and locked that. Then I called the MPs. They came out, verified that my street was not due to get attic fans for a couple of weeks, and took all the information I could give them, which wasn't much. I never heard anything back, so they probably never identified him. 2 or 3 weeks later, the real installers came from facilities engineers, in uniform. They promptly produced work orders and ID. Candy looked at them and went back to playing with the baby. I'm absolutely certain that she saved me from grape, possibly from murder. Story 16. I was walking through my local Target when I passed a guy going the opposite direction. He didn't have a cart or anything, and as I passed, he suddenly decided to turn and go the other way from which he was headed. It caught my attention as odd that he was so aimless. IDK if it was my past in retail or just a natural instinct. I kept my eye on him as I was walking to a register, and he walked past me. As I watched him, he walked up to the gift card section where a woman in sweats crouched, looking through the gift cards. I wondered if he knew her since he seemed to have been aware of her being there and directed at her. That's when he walked away, pulled out his phone, then walked back to where she was, positioned himself behind her and took a picture. I could see the screen from where I was, and I saw the blink of the screen and the still image of this modestly dressed woman in leisure clothes with a hat. The most skin you could see of her was her hands. That's what disturbed me most about it. She just looked normal, but this creep targeted her. I walked up to the checkout girl and asked if there is security in the building, so she called them over. The man had walked off at this point. But once security came over, I saw him in the grocery area and described him while pointing him out. Another security guy walked up and asked what was happening. We filled him in and he said, "Oh, the guy from the parking lot? Yikes. This guy has been on a mission or something." I don't even want to know what he was doing in the parking lot to get security's attention. It was a very bizarre and I would say scary situation where I wasn't sure how to handle it, but I knew I had to do and say something, but I didn't know how to insert myself between the guy and this unsuspecting woman. I'm still not sure if I should have actually approached, but I'm glad that at least security was involved. Story 17. I used to work with juvenile offenders. One day while I was running another house for another coach, this kid asked me for a razor. He didn't have any facial hair, so it struck me as odd, but maybe he wanted to shave his armpits or manscape, so I gave him a razor. 10 minutes go by, and I ask him if he's okay. He responds kinda weird, and I hear a lot of clanking going on, like razor on a sink. I tell him I need the razor back in a few minutes, so he's going to have to hurry it up. The razor I gave him was dual-bladed. He returned to me a busted razor with only one blade. It took some convincing, but I eventually got him to return the razor blade. He tried to tell me it fell down the sink. My flashlight and the safety mesh in the drain proved that false. Luckily, his case manager was doing a home visit, and I expressed my concerns to her that he had intentionally broken the razor and removed the blade. She didn't think it was anything too serious after talking to the young man. I asked if she wanted to put him on a suicide watch and she declined. I still put him on a level 2, which required keeping him in sight at all times. The night staff wasn't happy with it, but understood I had my reasoning. 2 weeks later, the kid moves into my house that I am in charge of due to issues with some of the other kids at the other house. He comes to me and thanks me for putting him on that watch because he had planned to cut open his wrist with it when I had left. I was never so relieved to have listened to my guy there and ignored that case manager. I don't know what he told her, but it was enough to keep her red flags silent. Story 17. When I was 20 on a college trip around Europe, my roommate had had way too much to drink in Paris. We met this guy under the Eiffel Tower. He was also an American, so we let him tag along with us. I was the only one sober. Alcohol hates me and always makes me sick. And I was telling my roommate it was getting late and we needed to get back. She was adamant that she wanted to find the catacombs at 2 a.m. I tried to explain there was no way we could get in, and besides, she could barely walk, but she kept insisting. The guy kept saying he'd be happy to stay out with her and take her wherever she wanted to go. Eventually I had to straight up say, "Dude, I'm not going to leave her alone with you, and that's flat." He left after that. We got back to the hotel, and only once we were safe in our room did I start to get shaky like that, thinking about what might have happened to her. The next morning I told her what happened and she thanked me for not letting her go with him, that she was way too wasted to consent to anything, and things likely would have ended badly. Always trust those gut feelings. Story 18. I was 18 years old living with my 20-year-old brother. One evening I get home with my girlfriend and he's not at home. Instead of assuming he's at the grocery store or out for a walk or literally anywhere else, I get really worried and immediately go around looking for him in the apartment. I remember checking the closets for him even for some reason, and my girlfriend tells me I'm acting really weird and tries to calm me down, but I can't get rid of the feeling that something is really wrong. Later that evening, our cousin calls me saying that he found my brother on the street having been thrown out from a bar screaming and crying that he doesn't deserve to live, and that he was going to end his life by jumping into the river. Luckily, he was too drunk to reach it. That was the day we found out about his deep depression and suicidal thoughts. I really have no clue how I knew something was wrong. Maybe there was a small detail in way he left the apartment that my brain reacted on, or maybe I subconsciously had noticed him acting differently lately. He was always the one worrying for me since he's the big brother and I was always pretty laid back and carefree, so I was really overwhelmed by how confidently My gut feeling was telling me that something was wrong. Today, 10 years later, he recently became a father of a beautiful girl and is the happiest he has ever been, even despite him losing his job to COVID this past year. I am so proud of him. Story 19. Around 2018, I was managing an auto parts store. We had a delivery driver, 74 yo but in decent health, who was putting restock away. I was doing my normal management duties and I heard a stepladder click into place. LPT. Always be alert and aware of what your team members are doing. I remembered that earlier that morning the same delivery driver had complained about feeling dizzy. I think he had blood sugar issues. Our top shelves were 12 feet, 5-ish meters for non-Americans, and I knew he was the only one putting the restock away. I got up from my desk and walked to the back where I heard him climbing the step ladder, and sure enough, as I rounded the corner, he was trying to put a radiator on the top shelf, lost his grip on it, and fell off the top shelf. I managed to catch him and break his fall. Right in his fall path where his head would have hit was a solid steel oil collection tank with sharp corners. He still had a sore back and shoulders the next day, but he was alive. TLDR, listen to people and act accordingly. It might save a life. Story 20. I was dropping my best friend off to her house after a party when she insisted for me to drop her at the top of her neighborhood street, very long street, because she didn't want her parents hearing my car or seeing the lights to know she sneaked out. It was pretty late, so I told her it's really dangerous, and it would still take a couple minutes to walk down, but she didn't let me. I finally agreed. I waved her goodbye and drove away, going to my own house when after a solid 30 minutes after getting home, I called her to make sure she got into her house safely. She wasn't picking up nor replying to my messages. My gut feeling from the start when I dropped her off was already very intense, but now I started to panic because sure, she may have fell asleep, but the bad feeling I had grown. I grabbed my keys whilst in my PJs and drove straight to her house. I banged and shouted on her house door when her parents came down and asked, "What's up, Alyssa?" I asked them to check if my friend, I'm not going to mention her name for privacy reasons, got home, and they said their daughter wasn't in the house. That's when I knew something was wrong. I spent the night at their house where we called the police. A case was ongoing and nothing could be done but pray. I left for home the next afternoon when later that evening I and her parents were both called by the police to confirm a dead woman's body. As expected, it was her. She was tested and was confirmed to have been grape. Her body was dumped in a public trash field a couple streets from her house. Till this day, I feel guilty and as if it was my own fault. I shouldn't have dropped her where she asked me and should have been smarter than to give in. I sometimes feel worse when I think about the fact that if I were with her, it could have been two bodies and feel happy it wasn't me. But at the same time, if I walked with her down to her house, maybe she would have lived. Sorry, and I do miss you a lot. /3. Story 21. Hindsight is 20/20ths. None of these things by themselves seemed weird until I looked at them all together. I was in a college class. The professor was young, clearly missed his college days, and gave off that vibe of wanting to be everyone's friend. During the first session, we were going over the syllabus and he said, "If you're going to miss a class, just come to my office hours." Fine, that's pretty standard. Except he kept saying it. Any questions, whether about the class or anything else, he really wanted us to go to his office hours. He must have mentioned it 3 or 4 times in that one class period. Over the course of the first few weeks, he clearly made a favorite of me. Nothing that crossed a line, but in his attempt to be everyone's friend, he would crack a lot of jokes and jibe people. I don't particularly like these types of people, so I would respond in kind, and he seemed to take that as a challenge. He picked on me frequently in that it's all in good fun but I'm borderline a dick kind of way. A couple weeks into the semester, I had to miss a class period. When I got back, I decided to go to his office hours to find out what I had missed. I was hanging out in the library between classes and got up to pack up my things and go to his office. A very distinct voice in my head said, "No." It was like a thought, but louder and completely random. I haven't experienced anything like that before or since. I wasn't considering not going until that moment, but I started to get this very strong feeling that I shouldn't go. I was trying to rationalize this super weird feeling and figured, well, his office hours are right before our class period, so why don't I just go and talk to him after class? So I did. And nothing happened. I finished out the rest of the semester and he continued to pick on me and ask me lots of personal questions, which I dodged and ignored. The semester passed without event. 2 semesters later, I had completely forgotten this class. Hadn't given it another thought since I completed the final. Then gossip starts to spread that a girl was sexually assaulted by a professor. Nothing came out about it for a while except that the university was denying it, and weren't going to take any action against the professor. So the girl went to the local news. She told her story while remaining anonymous and demanded action from the university. The story blew up and started a petition to have the professor removed. That's when his name came out. It was the professor I had 2 semesters earlier, who had made a favorite of me. He assaulted the student in his office hours. I immediately burst into tears because I know without a doubt that that girl was supposed to be me. But my gut told me that day not to go, and thank God I listened. FYI, the professor was eventually removed from the university, but only after a huge protest from the students. Story 22. Worked with an older guy. He was quiet, skittish, and polite. He strived to be helpful as the work was very group teamwork oriented. I couldn't stand him. I loathed working with him. I even felt the whisper of an urge to fight the damn guy. And I'm an average small chick. Very out of character for me. I am absurdly non-confrontational. My feelings and reaction to the guy puzzled both my husband and me. He would often tell me the dude has never done or said anything to me off color, and he's right. I still couldn't like the guy. One day the coworker doesn't show up, which is unusual since he almost never called out or was ever late. Later we catch sight of him on the news, busted for an extensive child porn ring. Guess my gut knew. On the plus side, I get to gleefully hate anyone I want without reason, and my husband can't argue against it. Story 23. Was the first day of a summer camp. Something felt off and my stomach got queasy immediately after getting out of the car. I was told I'd be sleeping with about 14 other boys my age under an old crusty tent with no floor or screen door to keep bugs out during the hottest and most humid month in recent years. I asked to go to the bathroom because I was feeling sick. Then I told my dad, who was with me, that I had a stomachache and that I needed to go home. We packed our things and left. My dad told me as we got in the car, "Thank goodness you felt it was off there too, and I didn't feel comfortable with you in the crappy tent while I was in a cabin almost 2 miles away." A massive storm hit the campsite that night, possible tornadoes in the area too. After everything calmed down there, the cabins and buildings were untouched, while things like the tent I would have been asleep in wasn't even on the campgrounds anymore. Thanks, gut feeling. Story 24. 3 times comes to mind. Living in Seattle, running to catch a bus. Just about to catch it, and suddenly I thought stop, and my body just stopped. I let the bus go. I was pissed that I missed the bus. 2 stops after mine, a guy got on the bus and shot the driver. The bus went off a bridge and landed on an apartment building. Illed a couple people. Second time walking to the bus stop, again the body voice saying stop. I stopped, backed up a bit, and then watched a car get T-boned, ping-pong off of other cars, then come to rest where I would have been standing if I would have kept walking. Last time it happened was not long ago. I now live in Toronto. I was going to head out to hit the store and Michael's for stuff, walked yet again to the bus stop. Once I got there, the damn body voice said, "Not today, go home," so went home. My husband calls about 20 minutes later to frantically ask where I was. I told him that the voice said, "Go home." An incel rented a van and drove down the sidewalk in front of where I was supposed to be, about when I would have been there. Killed 10 and injured 16. The body voice must always be listened to. Story 25. Not my story, but my mother's. Years ago, when my parents recently got married, my mom was invited to hang out with friends in a mall. Nothing fancy, just to get a coffee and catch up. On the day of the meeting, my mom was getting ready, and while getting her makeup on, something inside her told her, "Don't go." My mother always told me how out of nowhere she started feeling a deep paranoia, a primal fear that told her to stay on the house and cancel the meeting. She called her friends, made up an excuse, and stayed home. Friends decided to still meet at the food court in the mall. Fast forward a couple of hours later, there was a mass shooting in the mall where her friends went for the coffee. Nobody died, and the only person who got hurt was a security guy. My mother's friend was on the food court when everything went down and went into hiding in a restaurant after hearing the first shots coming from the main floor. My mother is convinced that her gut feeling was actually her guardian angel watching over her. Thanks for watching. Subscribe for more videos. Take care.